All right, Unit 14, the book of Revelation. Notice that it's singular. Do not call it Revelations. There's only one. And if you call it Revelations, you will be betraying your ignorance of the title of this book. So please refer to Revelation as one revelation. Let's dig in. All right, the structure is as follows, and you'll see this fleshed out in the textbook. The prologue, the messages to the seven churches, the vision of heaven, seven seals, seven trumpets, seven signs, seven bowls. And then the triumph of the Almighty, the New Jerusalem in chapter 21, and the epilogue in chapter 22. Now, who's the author? Well, early attestation says John the Apostle. According to Justin Martyr, Melito of Sardis, Irenaeus, and the Muratori Canon, he is the author. There are early rejections of John the Apostle. Marcion rejected him. The Alogoi rejected the apostolic origin of Revelation. Alogoi is those who didn't believe the word. Logos and logoi is the plural of logos. And you put an alpha in front of it, it's like putting a UN in front of English words. It negates it. It negates the word. It's called an alpha for the letter A, privative, alpha privative, the alogoi. Dionysius of Alexandria denied and rejected his author, the apostle's authorship. He says the author of this book makes no claim to be an apostle. Conceptions and arrangement of the apocalypse are completely different from the fourth gospel. Well, yeah, they're different genre. The Greek is drastically different, of course. He's in a state of a vision. And chiliasm, which is the Greek word for, chiliastic means 1,000. Millennialism. In the contemporary discussion, the internal evidence, here are the arguments, and I'm just going to hit these very quickly, that there's lack of apostolic claim. But contra to that, Carson and Moose say, he could just as easily have not been mentioned because he's so well known. Theological differences. All these are weak. There's differences in the understanding of God, different presentation of Christ. There are eschatological differences. We would expect them to be different in the apocalyptic literature. Stylistic differences. It's a completely different genre. It's going to be different. The book of Revelation has solecisms that appear to be quite deliberate. The conclusions. Who wrote this book? Some say John the Elder. It's pseudonymous. Others say the Johannine School. Some would even propose an unknown John. He was heretofore unknown. Carson and Moose say it's written by John, the beloved disciple. I would agree. It's from Patmos, the rocky island, about 6 miles wide, 10 miles long. It's 40 miles off the coast from Ephesus. Maybe you can go there one day and visit. I made it all the way to Ephesus once, but the boat wasn't running out to the island that day, and we were out of time. Early Christian testimony say they date it among Claudius during his reign. Epiphanius puts it in around Claudius. Some would say during the reign of Nero. That's pretty early. Syriac versions of Revelation put it here. Domitian, Irenaeus, Victorinus, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Eusebius all place the writing during Domitian persecution. Some would even say Trajan's persecution, much, much later. Dorotheus and Theophylact place it there. Contemporary discussion says Is it Nero versus Domitian? So now we're narrowing it down. The persecution, little hard evidence for widespread official persecution in Asia Minor under Nero or Domitian. The emperor worship. It's clear that Domitian stressed his own deity. He made it a test of loyalty, favoring Domitian here. Condition of the churches. Elements in the letters to the 7 churches are more compatible to the 90s than the early 100s. The existence of the Nero myth, the beast recovering from a mortal wound. Could this be Nero? Chapter 13 of Revelation. Contemporary discussions against these two, about these two. Existence of the Jerusalem temple. Revelation 11 could refer to the temple that's still standing. It could also be a metaphorical reference. Revelation 17, we have 5 of the 7 kings have fallen. Most evidence favors a date during Domitian's reign. I think it's the 90s. I think it is during Domitian's time. Written to 7 churches in the Roman province of Asia. It borrows in composition more from the Old Testament than any other New Testament book. How about that? Most of this comes in the form of allusions rather than direct quotations. May have been borrowing directly from New Testament texts as well. Source theories, in other words, from source criticism, seem to fall flat, don't really ultimately help us. The book would not have needed more than 1 stage of composition. Elements in the Revelation, it is prophecy, it is apocalyptic, it is a letter. It has 3 genres. Now we've learned about these different genres in your hermeneutics class, but it combines these 3. So Revelation is unique among other apocalypses in Judaism. It differs from the other New Testament books. Far few Greek manuscripts of this book. The value of the witnesses is weighed toward the Alexandrinus manuscript, and it's not present in Codex Vaticanus. Those are Alexandrinus and Vaticanus are the names of manuscripts that contain significant portions of the New Testament. Here we have adopted into the canon the attestation to include it in Ignatius, Barnabas, Shepherd of Hermas, Papias, Justin, Irenaeus, the Muratorian canon, Clement of Alexandria, and Origen. All want to adopt it into the canon. You realize the canon was a process. We're going to look at the formation of the canon here in our last chapter in just in a minute. Well, I say in just in a minute. For me, as I'm making these audio tapes, but the next unit you're going to deal with canon. Rejection by Marcion the heretic, you would expect that. By the Alogoi, those who were Gnostics, you would expect that. Dionysius and the Council of Laodicea rejected it. Earliest editions of the Syriac Peshitta, another manuscript. Rejection occurred mostly because of the eschatology of the book rather than widespread doubts about the apostolicity of the authorship. The contribution of this book is the sovereignty of God, the absolute sovereignty of God. Very high Christology, the emphasis on the effect of the cross, and, of course, eschatology. The end in biblical thought shapes and informs the past and the present. All right, class, this is the end of our biblical material for the class. Let's go to the next unit, and we will look at how all of these came together in the canon. Contribution of Revelation. Now, class, here's where we really can't spend a lot of time, but there are 4 basic approaches to interpreting this book. The preterist approach, you can read about these in your textbook, but the preterist approach basically says everything happened in Revelation back in John's day. It's past tense. Preterist is an old description of past tense verbs in Greek. Historical approach wants to line up the book of Revelation with historical developments of the church throughout history. The problem with that is it all changes. And there's so many renditions of the historical approach. The futurist approach is the one you're probably most familiar with. It tends to do it more justice, but it does not detract from the manner in which John addresses the topics in his own day. So you're going to probably be more familiar with this approach. The idealist approach is just, hey, it's a book about good and evil, and good wins out. So we don't put much credence in that approach. And if you have read Duval and Guthrie's book, they take an eclectic approach over in Grasping God's Word we use in some of our hermeneutics classes. So you're probably more familiar with the futurist approach. Now, when you get ready to teach from this book, you have to go through these. And what's interesting is to interpret any one given passage through each of these lenses of interpretation.